Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The package arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in late September. Leonard Pierce had been expecting bills, maybe a catalogue or two, but certainly not the unmarked manila envelope that sat waiting in his mailbox. No return address, no postage mark he could make out clearly. Just his name written in careful block letters across the front. Inside his Houston apartment, Pierce opened it carefully. His hands, weathered from years of handling delicate archival materials at NASA, knew how to treat old things with respect. What he found made his breath catch. A film canister, the metal corroded at the edges, with faded text barely visible on its side. He had to hold it up to the light to read the words, Apollo-21, July 1975, destroy. Pierce set the canister down on his kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. He had worked in NASA's archives for 32 years before his retirement. He knew every Apollo mission by heart. Apollo 11, the first landing. Apollo 13, the miraculous survival. Apollo 17, the final mission, splashing down in December 1972 with geologist Harrison Schmitt aboard. There was no Apollo 18, no Apollo 19, no Apollo 20, and certainly no Apollo 21. The Apollo program had ended. Everyone knew that. The funding had dried up, public interest had waned, and NASA had moved on to Skylab and the space shuttle. That was the official history. That was what Pierce had believed for his entire career. But here it was sitting on his table, insisting it had existed. Pierce had spent 3 decades cataloguing NASA's history. He'd handled moon rocks and mission patches, read through flight logs and technical manuals, preserved the documentary evidence of humanity's greatest achievement. He knew the gaps in the archive, the spaces where things should have been but weren't. He'd always assumed those gaps were just bureaucratic oversights, filing errors, the normal chaos of a massive organization. Now he wondered what else might be hiding in those gaps. The film canister sat on his table for 3 days before he worked up the courage to open it. When he finally did, he found a reel of 16mm film, badly degraded, but intact. He didn't have the equipment to view it at home. That would require a trip to a specialist, someone who could transfer the footage to digital without destroying what was left of it. But before he did that, Pierce needed to know if the canister was real. He needed to know if Apollo 21 had actually existed. He spent the next week reaching out to retired NASA personnel, using connections he'd built over 3 decades. Most wouldn't talk. A few hung up as soon as he mentioned 1975. Several told him, in carefully neutral tones, that he should forget about whatever he thought he'd found. One man, a former flight controller named Richard Dunn, told him to burn the canister and never speak of it again. Some things are classified for a reason, Dunn said. Some secrets are kept because the truth would break people. But eventually Pierce found Walter Gibson. Gibson had been an engineer in mission control during the Apollo era, one of the anonymous voices that guided astronauts through the complexities of spaceflight. He was 83 now, living in a retirement community outside Tampa. When Pierce called and mentioned Apollo 21, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Where did you hear that name?" "I found something," Pierce said carefully, "something that shouldn't exist." Another silence. "Come see me, but not here. They watch this place." They met in a parking lot 3 miles from Gibson's retirement home. The old man insisted on talking in Pierce's car, away from any listening devices Gibson was convinced were everywhere. He looked smaller than Pierce had expected, diminished by age and the weight of secrets he'd carried for half a century. "I knew someone would come asking eventually," Gibson said, his hands shaking slightly as he lit a cigarette. The flame from his lighter flickered in the Florida humidity. 50 years is a long time to keep a secret this big. Too long. Things have a way of surfacing. "So it's real? Apollo 21. Gibson nodded slowly, took a long drag, and stared out at the parking lot like he was seeing something else entirely. July 1975. We launched them at 3:47 in the morning from a restricted pad. Saturn V rocket, same as the others, but this one didn't have NASA markings. This one was black budget all the way." "Why? What was the mission?" Gibson turned to look at Pierce with eyes that had seen too much. "We sent 3 men up there to investigate something we found. Something that Apollo 15 photographed in 1971. He paused, seemed to be weighing how much to say. "They came back, all 3 of them, alive. But what came back wasn't really them anymore. Not entirely." Over the next 3 hours, Gibson told him everything. The story began in August 1971, when Apollo 15 astronauts David Scott and James Irwin were conducting their 3rd moonwalk near Hadley Rill. They'd been photographing geological features when Scott noticed something unusual in the distance, towards the southern highlands, a formation that caught the light in a way that didn't match the surrounding terrain. "Scott took about 40 pictures of it with the Hasselblad," Gibson said. "Telephoto lens, highest resolution we had. When we got the film back and developed it, we saw what he'd seen. In Tycho Crater, one of the most prominent craters on the near side of the moon, there was something that didn't belong." "What kind of something?" "A perfect circle, maybe 30 feet across, perfectly smooth, set into the crater floor like someone had cut it out with a laser. The angles were all wrong for a crater, the edges were too clean. And in the center, if you looked at the enhanced images, there was a faint luminescence, light coming from inside the moon." Gibson explained how the photographs had been immediately classified. The CIA got involved within hours. The Defense Department sent observers. Scientists from a dozen different agencies examined the images, trying to explain what they were seeing through natural processes. Lava tubes, they suggested, unusual rock formations, tricks of light and shadow. But nobody really believed those explanations. The formation was too precise, too deliberate. Someone or something had made it. "The Russians knew about it too," Gibson said quietly. "They'd spotted it on their lunar probe imagery back in 1966, but kept it quiet. When we found it independently, that's when things got interesting. There was a secret meeting somewhere in Geneva, I think. American and Soviet space officials. They agreed on something unprecedented. Cooperation. The Russians wanted us to go check it out first." "Why us?" Gibson smiled without humor. "Because if something went wrong, better it happened to Americans than Russians. Cold War politics. They were happy to let us take the risk." The planning for Apollo 21 began in late 1972, just as the official Apollo program was winding down. It was hidden within the preparations for the Apollo-Soyuz test project, the joint mission scheduled for July 1975. While the world watched American and Russian spacecraft dock in orbit, a secret mission would launch to the moon. "We had 9 people in mission control who knew the truth," Gibson said. 9 out of hundreds. Everyone else thought they were running simulations, training exercises. Only the 9 of us knew we had live astronauts up there." Pierce asked about the crew. Who had NASA trusted with a mission this sensitive? Gibson pulled out a photograph from his jacket pocket. 3 men in flight suits standing in front of a Saturn V rocket. The photo was creased and faded, hidden away for 50 years. "Commander Theodore Sullivan," Gibson said, pointing to the man on the left. "Apollo 14 veteran. Walked on the moon with Alan Shepard in 1971. Geologist, methodical thinker, calm under pressure. If anyone could handle an unknown situation, it was Ted. Sullivan looked like the archetype of an astronaut. Square jaw, confident smile, eyes that had seen Earth from space and come back changed by it. He was 42 in the photo, experienced and capable. Lunar module pilot Frank Morrison. Gibson indicated the man in the center. Never flew before Apollo-21. He was a geologist too, PhD from MIT, expert in lunar geology. He had a wife, Catherine, and a 7-year-old daughter named Jenny. Family man. Cautious by nature. We picked him because he knew what to look for, how to analyze what they might find. Morrison was younger, maybe 35, with gentle eyes and a soft smile. He looked like someone who'd be more comfortable in a laboratory than a spacecraft. And Command Module pilot Henry Park. The man on the right was the youngest, couldn't have been more than 30. Korean-American, grew up in Sacramento, brilliant navigator, best spatial reasoning skills I've ever seen. He could plot orbital mechanics in his head that took other astronauts hours with computers. Quiet kid, but sharp as hell. Pierce studied the photograph, memorizing the faces of 3 men who'd officially never existed. What happened to them? Gibson's hands trembled as he put the photograph away. They found what we sent them to find, and it destroyed them. Over the next several days, Pierce began tracking down anyone connected to Apollo-21. Most trails led nowhere. People who'd been transferred, retired, died. Records that had been purged or sealed. But slowly, he assembled fragments of the truth. He found Frank Morrison's daughter, Jenny Morrison, now 62 years old, living in Denver. She worked as a high school teacher, had never married, and had spent her entire life wondering what really happened to her father. They met at a coffee shop downtown. She brought a box of items she'd saved, things her mother had kept hidden for decades before passing them on, with whispered warnings. They told us he died in a helicopter crash during training, Jenny said, her fingers tracing the edge of a photograph of her father holding her as a child. July 29th, 1975, closed casket funeral, military honours. My mother received a flag and a letter from the president, thanking my father for his service. But you didn't believe it? Jenny shook her head. My mother didn't believe it. She knew something else had happened. She never said it directly, but I could tell. She'd stand in the backyard at night, looking up at the moon, and sometimes she'd cry. I asked her once why she was sad, and she said she was waiting for Daddy to come home. I thought she meant from heaven. Now I'm not so sure. She opened the box and pulled out a letter. The paper was yellowed with age, the envelope unmarked. This came 2 weeks after they told us he was dead. Someone left it in our mailbox in the middle of the night. No postage, no return address. Just this letter in my father's handwriting. Pierce took it carefully. The writing was shaky, barely legible, like someone had written it while their hands were trembling. Katie, I'm so sorry. I should never have touched it. I should have listened when Ted told me to stay back. Tell Jenny I love her more than anything in the world. Tell her not to look at the moon. Tell her to forget me. What's coming back isn't me anymore. I can feel it inside my head, changing the way I think, changing what I am. It showed me things. Terrible, ancient things. I know where they are now. All 847 of them. I can see them in my mind, spread across the earth like a web. They're all connected. They're all part of the same thing. And it's waking up, God forgive me. It's waking up because we found it. Please forgive me. Please forget me. Tell Jenny her father loved her. The thing wearing his face when it comes back won't be him. Don't let it near her. Don't let it near anyone. I love you. I'm so sorry. Frank. Pierce read the letter 3 times. His hands were shaking when he handed it back. Your mother never showed this to anyone? She hid it. She was terrified of it. When I was 18, she finally told me what she thought happened. She said the government sent my father somewhere dangerous, somewhere he wasn't supposed to come back from. She said he did come back briefly, but he wasn't right. She saw him one more time, in early August, before he died. He came to the house in the middle of the night. She wouldn't tell me what he said or what he looked like, but after he left, she burned all his papers and photographs. Everything except this letter and a few pictures. She wanted to erase every trace of him. Why? Jenny's eyes filled with tears. Because she was afraid he'd come back for me. That's what she said on her deathbed. I erased him to protect you. If there's nothing left of him here, maybe it won't know where to find you. I didn't understand what she meant. I still don't. Pierce asked about the other families. Jenny directed him to people she'd found over the years, other children of Apollo 21, who'd been told the same lies, given the same closed casket funerals. Theodore Sullivan's wife, Margaret, had died in 1982. Officially, it was cirrhosis of the liver. Unofficially, according to neighbours Pierce tracked down, she'd drunk herself to death after years of keeping every curtain in her house drawn, refusing to go outside after dark and telling anyone who'd listen that her husband was still alive somewhere, but that she hoped he'd never come home. The Sullivans had no children, but Pierce found a niece, Susan Sullivan, who remembered visiting her aunt in the late 70s. The house was dark, always dark. Aunt Margaret had covered all the mirrors with sheets. She wouldn't say why. She barely ate. She just sat in the living room with all the lights off, staring at the ceiling. I asked her once what she was looking at, and she said she was making sure it wasn't moving. The ceiling. She was watching the ceiling to make sure it wasn't moving. Henry Park's family had fared somewhat better, at least outwardly. His parents had accepted the official story of a training accident. But Park's younger brother David had seen Henry one final time. Pierce drove to Sacramento to meet David Park, now in his late 70s. They sat in David's living room drinking tea while afternoon light slanted through the windows. "Henry came to see me," David said, his voice soft with memory. "It was the middle of the night, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. Must have been early, August 1975. I woke up and he was standing in my bedroom doorway. I almost didn't recognize him. He'd lost so much weight. His eyes were different, darker somehow, hollow." "What did he say?" "He handed me a notebook, told me I had to hide it where nobody would ever find it. Said if anything happened to him, I should burn it without reading it. Then he left. Didn't say goodbye, didn't hug me. Just turned and walked out. I heard a car drive away. That was the last time I saw my brother alive." "Did you burn the notebook?" David shook his head slowly. "I kept it for a week, trying to decide what to do. The curiosity ate at me. Finally, I read it. I wish I hadn't." He retrieved the notebook from a safe in his bedroom. It was small, bound in black leather, the pages filled with Henry Park's precise handwriting. The entries were dated starting from July 18th, 1975. Pierce spent the afternoon reading it. The early entries were mundane, documenting the normal routines of spaceflight. Equipment checks, course corrections, meals eaten, sleep periods. Park wrote about the view of Earth receding behind them, the strange silence of space, the anticipation of reaching the moon. July 19th, 3 days to the moon, everything nominal. Ted is confident. Frank is excited about the geology we'll see. I keep thinking about that photograph from Apollo 15. Command says it's probably just an unusual formation, but I can tell nobody really believes that. There's something waiting up there. I can feel it. July 20th. We all had the same dream last night. We compared notes this morning, and the details matched exactly. That shouldn't be possible. We were sleeping in different parts of the spacecraft, but we all dreamed about standing in shallow water. The water was warm, and we could feel something moving underneath it, something large that disturbed the surface. We couldn't see it, but we knew it was there. We knew it was watching us. Ted reported it to Houston, but they just told us to continue the mission. I don't think they understand what it means that we shared the same dream. I don't think they want to understand. July 21st. Lunar orbit insertion was successful. We're circling the moon now, passing over the far side every 2 hours. Henry and I will separate in the Eagle 2 tomorrow and land near Tycho Crater. During our third far side pass, when we lost contact with Earth, something happened. All three of us felt it. A presence. Like someone was in the spacecraft with us, watching us, studying us. The temperature dropped. I know that doesn't make physical sense, but I swear the air got colder. And there was a sound on the radio during the blackout, very faint, but rhythmic, like breathing. Ted said it was probably just interference, but I could see in his eyes that he didn't believe that. None of us did. July 22nd. Morning. Today's the day. Frank and I separate from Henry in 6 hours and descend to the surface. I should be excited. I should be thrilled that I'm about to walk on the moon. Instead, I'm terrified. I keep thinking about that dream, about something moving under the water. I keep thinking about the presence we felt yesterday. Whatever we're going to find down there, it knows we're coming. I can feel it waiting for us. July 22nd, evening. We found it. God help us, we found it. Frank is sedated now. He won't stop screaming. I can still hear him in my head, even though the drugs have knocked him unconscious. What we saw in Tycho Crater, what happened when Frank knelt down beside it, I don't have words for it. The opening in the lunar surface was exactly where the photographs said it would be. Perfectly circular, perfectly smooth, like someone had carved it with impossible precision. The edges were too clean for any natural process, and it was moving, expanding and contracting by a few inches, like the moon itself was breathing through that hole. We approached it carefully. Houston gave us permission to investigate, to examine it up close. Frank knelt down at the edge to collect samples of the regolith around it. I was 10 feet back, filming everything. Frank reached out his hand toward the surface near the opening. He didn't touch the opening itself, just the lunar soil next to it. The moment his glove made contact with the ground, both of us froze. I don't know how else to describe it. 1 second, I was standing there, conscious and in control of my body. The next second, I was somewhere else, not physically. My body was still on the moon, but my mind was somewhere vast and dark and ancient. I saw things, felt things, understood things that humans aren't meant to understand. I saw Earth from a perspective that existed before the Earth existed, before the sun ignited, before the solar system formed. I saw the universe as a young thing, hot and chaotic, and I saw something that was already old when the universe was young, something that had been waiting in the spaces between reality, patient and vast and incomprehensibly alien. It didn't speak to me. Speech is too limiting for what it is. It showed me. It opened my mind and poured images directly into my consciousness. I saw 847 locations on Earth where parts of it are buried. Not physically buried. Hidden in spaces that overlap with our reality, but exist slightly to the side of it. Pocket dimensions, maybe, or folds in space-time. I don't have the language for it. But they're there. They've always been there. Under the ocean, deep in the earth, in places where the boundaries between our world and somewhere else are thin. When I came back to myself, maybe a minute had passed. Maybe less. Frank was screaming. I've never heard anyone scream like that. Raw, primal terror. He was clawing at his helmet like he wanted to rip it off, like he wanted to die right there on the lunar surface rather than live with what he'd seen. I grabbed him and dragged him back to the module. I don't remember the details. Everything's a blur of panic and horror. I just knew we had to leave. We had to get away from that opening before it showed us anything else. But it's too late. I can feel it in my head now, not controlling me. Not yet. Just there. Observing. Learning. It's studying us through the connection it made when Frank touched the ground. It's learning how we think, how we exist, how we interface with reality. And it's patient. It's been waiting for billions of years. It can wait a little longer. The entries from the return journey grew increasingly disturbed. Park documented everything with scientific precision, even as his own mental state deteriorated. July 23rd. Emergency ascent was successful. Docking took 3 attempts because Ted's hands wouldn't stop shaking. When we opened the hatch between the Eagle II and the Columbia, Frank floated in, without saying a word. He curled up in the corner and started whispering. Numbers, coordinates, longitude and latitude for places all over Earth. I started writing them down. I couldn't help myself. My hand just moved on its own, recording the numbers Frank was whispering. 847 locations. I wrote them all down. Now I can see them in my mind. I know exactly where they are. What's buried there? How deep? How did this information get into my head? July 24th. Frank drew something on the wall of the spacecraft today. He used the edge of a food packet to scratch it into the metal. A symbol. I can't describe it properly. It's geometric, but wrong. The angles don't add up correctly. Looking at it makes my eyes hurt, and my head ache. But I can't stop looking at it. There's something beautiful about it, something that speaks to a part of my mind I didn't know existed. Ted tried to cover it up, but Frank just drew it somewhere else. He's drawn it 847 times now. I counted, once for each location. July 25th. Frank stopped eating today. He says he doesn't need food anymore. He says the connection sustains him now. What connection? He won't explain. But I know what he means. I can feel it too. There's something feeding us, nourishing us in ways that physical food never could. I'm not hungry. I should be hungry. We're rationing supplies because the mission is running long, but I don't feel hungry at all. None of us do. July 26th. Something's wrong with Frank's arm. He carved that symbol into his own flesh, deep enough to scar. The wound should be bleeding, should be getting infected in the close quarters of the spacecraft. Instead, it's healing, faster than it should. The edges of the cuts are already sealing, and he's smiling. He carved his own flesh with a sharp piece of metal, and he smiled the entire time like it was the most natural thing in the world. I'm scared. Not of Frank. Of what's inside Frank. Of what's inside all of us now. We brought something back with us. Not a physical thing. A presence. An intelligence. It's in the spacecraft with us. I can feel it in the walls, hear it in the vibration of the metal. It's learning our technology, understanding how we built this machine, figuring out the principles of engineering and physics that allow us to travel through space. It's so curious, like a child discovering something new, except this child is older than worlds. July 27th, early morning. Last night, all 3 of us stopped talking at the same time. It wasn't planned. We were discussing the landing plan for splashdown, and mid-sentence, we all went silent. For 6 minutes, none of us said a word. We just sat there, floating in zero gravity, staring at nothing. Then, at exactly the same moment, we all spoke. The same words in the same tone with the same inflection. We understand now. We've always understood. We were always going to find it. This was always going to happen. I don't know what made us say that. The words came from my mouth, but they weren't my thoughts. They were something else's thoughts, using my voice. July 27th afternoon. We're splashing down in 2 hours. I should be relieved. I should be happy to be coming home. Instead, I'm filled with dread. Not for myself, for Earth, for everyone. We're bringing something back with us. Something ancient and patient and vast. It's been waiting on the moon, and in those 847 locations on Earth, for longer than life has existed on our planet, waiting for something to find it, waiting for something intelligent enough to understand it. And now it's found us. Now it knows we're here. Now it can come home. The notebook ended there. No final entry. No conclusion, just Park's last terrified thoughts before splashdown. David Park looked at Pierce with haunted eyes. My brother died 3 weeks after he gave me this notebook. They said it was suicide, but I don't believe that. I think whatever got into his head during that mission killed him. Or maybe he killed himself to stop it from learning more. From using him. I don't know. But I've carried this notebook for 50 years, wondering if I should have burned it like he asked. Wondering if the knowledge in it is dangerous just to possess. Pierce photographed every page, documenting the coordinates Park had written, the descriptions of what they'd encountered. He thanked David and left Sacramento with more questions than answers. The next piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. 3 days after visiting David Park, Pierce received a package at his apartment. Inside were 3 cassette tapes unmarked, with a typed note. You're asking the right questions. These will help you understand. Destroy them when you're done. The tapes contained audio recordings from Apollo-21. Not the official mission recordings, which had supposedly been destroyed. These were copies made by someone in mission control, who'd kept them hidden for 50 years. Pierce sat in his apartment and listened to the voices of dead men. The first tape began with the launch countdown. He heard the calm, professional tones of mission control, the rhythmic calls of status checks, the building roar of the Saturn V engines igniting. Then, Theodore Sullivan's voice, strong and confident. Tower clear, roll program initiated, all systems nominal. We are go for staging. The early parts of the mission sounded routine. Calls between the spacecraft and Houston, technical discussions about orbital mechanics, mundane updates about crew health and equipment status. But on the second day, things began to change. Mission elapsed time 43 hours, 17 minutes. Sullivan's voice still professional, but with an edge of concern. Houston, Apollo-21. We need to report an anomaly. During our scheduled rest period, all 3 crew members experienced identical dreams. We've compared details, and the correlation is exact. A pause, then a different voice from Houston, not the regular Capcom. Apollo-21, this is Flight Director, describe the dream. Frank Morrison's voice, slightly uncertain. We were standing in water, ankle deep maybe. The water was warm, and we could feel currents moving around our legs. But there was no walls, no boundaries, just this endless space filled with shallow water, and something was underneath. We couldn't see it, but we could feel the displacement when it moved. Something large, something aware of us. Another voice from Houston, this one carrying authority. Apollo-21, this is Mission Director. Note the report for the record. Continue nominal operations. Do not deviate from mission timeline. Henry Park's voice, quieter. Houston, with respect, 3 people can't have the same dream. That's not psychologically possible. Something's happening that we don't understand. Understood. Apollo-21. We'll have the flight surgeon review the data. Continue as planned. But Pierce could hear something in the Houston voices that the astronauts probably couldn't detect. Concern. Fear, even. They knew something was wrong. The second tape covered lunar orbit and the landing. Park's voice came through during the 4th pass over the far side, when the spacecraft was cut off from Earth by the bulk of the moon. Ted, Frank, are you feeling this? Feeling what? Sullivan asked. Like we're not alone. Like there's someone else in here with us. Morrison's nervous laugh. Yeah, I feel it too. The temperature just dropped about 5 degrees, didn't it? Gage says it's the same, Sullivan replied. But you're right, it feels colder. A hiss of static, then Park again. There's something on the radio. Listen. During the blackout, there's something transmitting. Pierce turned up the volume and listened carefully. Underneath the normal static of radio interference, there was a rhythm. Slow, steady, regular. In, out, like breathing, but with a cadence that was slightly wrong, slightly too slow for human lungs. Sullivan's voice, "I hear it. What is that?" "I don't know," Park said, "but it's coming from inside the spacecraft. I checked. The signal strength suggests the source is right here with us." The landing sequence was tense. Sullivan and Morrison separated from Park in the lunar module and descended toward Tycho Crater. Pierce listened to the controlled chaos of the landing, the calls of altitude and velocity, the careful piloting as Sullivan guided them down. "Contact light," Morrison said. "Eagle 2 is down." "Houston, Tycho base here." Sullivan's voice was steady. "The Eagle has landed." 7 hours of surface preparation followed. Equipment checks, suit pressure verification, airlock cycling. Then the hatch opened, and 2 men stepped out onto the lunar surface near one of the most prominent craters on the near side of the moon. For the first 40 minutes, everything seemed normal. Sullivan and Morrison moved around the landing site, setting up experiments, collecting samples, describing the terrain. Their voices were filled with the wonder that came from walking on another world. Then Morrison's voice cut through, sharp with tension. "Ted, hold on. There's something about 200 meters ahead. In that depression." "I see it," Sullivan responded. "Houston, we have a visual on the anomaly. Moving to investigate." The next 20 minutes were mostly silence, broken by occasional technical observations. Pierce could hear their breathing, steady and controlled, and the soft crunch of boots on regolith. Then, Sullivan's voice. "Houston, we are at the anomaly site. Can you see this through the camera?" A long pause from Houston. Then, "Apollo-21, we're seeing it. Confirm your observations." "The opening is perfectly circular," Sullivan said, "approximately 30 feet in diameter. The edges are geometrically precise, smooth. This is not a natural formation. Repeat, this is not a natural formation." Morrison's voice. "The interior surface appears to be reflective. I'm seeing light coming from deep inside. That shouldn't be possible." "Houston, Apollo-21, stand by." 2 minutes of silence. Pierce imagined the chaos in mission control. The urgent consultations, the calls being made to people far above the normal chain of command. Finally, "Apollo-21, this is Mission Director. You are authorized to approach and investigate. Do not, repeat, do not make physical contact with the anomaly without explicit permission. Visual inspection only. Is that clear?" "Copy, Houston. Visual inspection only." Morrison. "I'm going to collect samples from the regolith around the edge. The soil composition might tell us something about how this was formed." Sullivan. "Careful, Frank." The sound of Morrison's breathing, slightly elevated. The scrape of tools against the lunar surface. Then Morrison's voice filled with wonder. "Ted, this is incredible. The regolith near the opening has been altered somehow. The grain structure is different. It's been melted and re-solidified, but not by any heat source I recognize." "Don't get too close," Sullivan warned. "I'm just going to reach out and touch the surface near the edge, get a better look at the..." Then silence, complete, absolute silence. No breathing, no movement, nothing. "Frank?" Sullivan's voice, concerned. "Frank, respond." No answer. "Frank." More urgent now. Pierce listened to 37 seconds of nothing. He counted the seconds on the mission timer in the corner of the recording. 37 seconds of complete silence from 2 men who should have been talking, breathing, moving. Then a gasp. Morrison sucking in air like he'd been drowning. "Frank, what happened? Talk to me." When Morrison spoke, his voice was barely recognizable. High, strained, breaking. "It knows we're here. Oh God, it knows about all of us. It knows about home. It knows about Earth. Ted, it's been waiting. It's been waiting for so long, since before since before everything. And now we've found it. Now it can wake up. Frank, calm down. Tell me what you saw. I saw what it is. Morrison was screaming now. I saw where it came from. I saw what it wants. Ted, we have to leave. We have to leave right now. We can't let it follow us home. Sullivan's voice struggling to stay calm. Okay, we're leaving. Come on, back to the module. It's already too late, Morrison sobbed. It's already in our heads. It showed me things. Places on Earth. 847 places where parts of it are sleeping. I can see them all. I know exactly where they are. How did it put that in my head? How do I know things I shouldn't know? The sounds of struggle. Sullivan trying to move Morrison. Morrison resisting. Both of them breathing hard in their suits. It's not evil, Morrison said suddenly, his voice dropping to a whisper. That's what you have to understand. It's not evil. It's just old. So impossibly old. It was here before the sun existed, before the earth formed. It's been waiting in the dark places, the empty spaces, for something to find it, for something intelligent enough to understand it. And now we're here. Now it has us. Frank, we're going back to the module now. Move your feet. The sounds of two men scrambling across the lunar surface, Morrison still talking, his words tumbling over each other. It showed me its history. It showed me what it's been doing all this time, waiting and watching and learning. It studied the formation of stars. It watched planets coalesce from dust. It observed the beginning of life on Earth, the first single-celled organisms, the evolution of complexity. It's been here the whole time, scattered across the solar system, pieces of it hidden in the places we don't look. And all that time it's been waiting for us, for humans, for something that could think and build and travel through space, something that could bring it home. The hatch of the lunar module slammed shut. Sullivan's voice. Houston, we are aborting the mission. Request immediate ascent clearance. Houston, Apollo 21, what is your status? Frank is compromised. Something happened when he approached the anomaly. He's experiencing severe psychological distress. We need to leave now. Apollo 21, you do not have clearance for emergency ascent. Stand by for evaluation. Negative, Houston. Sullivan's voice was sharp, commanding. We are not standing by. Frank needs immediate medical attention, and we are not staying on this surface 1 second longer than necessary. Initiating ascent countdown now. A different voice from Houston, cold and authoritative. Commander Sullivan, you will await clearance or face court-martial upon return. Court-martial me, if I make it back, Sullivan said, but I'm getting my crew off this moon. Ascent in T-10 minutes. The recording captured those 10 minutes in excruciating detail. Morrison's voice in the background, no longer screaming, but whispering, a continuous stream of coordinates and numbers. Sullivan, running through pre-launch checks with mechanical precision, his training overriding his fear. Houston alternating between threats and attempts at reason. Then the ascent engine fired, and the Eagle 2 lifted away from Tycho Crater. The docking with Henry Park in the Columbia should have been simple. Sullivan had performed the maneuver flawlessly on Apollo 14. But the recording captured 3 failed attempts, each one accompanied by Sullivan's growing frustration and Park's increasingly concerned voice coaching him through it. Ted, you're coming in too fast. Reduce velocity. I know. My hands won't hold steady. Take a breath. Center yourself. You've done this 100 times. Not after seeing what we just saw. On the 4th attempt, the 2 spacecraft finally locked together. The moment the hatches opened, Park's voice came through. Jesus Christ, what happened to Frank? Pierce could hear Morrison in the background humming, a low, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the recording equipment. It wasn't a tune anyone would recognize. It was just a single note, held endlessly, with harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from a human voice. "He touched the ground near the anomaly," Sullivan said. "Something happened. He saw something. Henry, I think we're in serious trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind where I don't think we're coming home as the same people who left." The third tape covered the return journey, and this was where the recordings became truly disturbing. The first day back, Morrison remained largely unresponsive. Park's voice log, recorded privately when the others were sleeping. "Frank has been humming the same tone for 6 hours straight. He doesn't stop, not to eat, not to drink, not even to breathe. He just keeps humming. The sound seems to come from somewhere deep in his chest. It's making the walls of the spacecraft vibrate. I can feel it in my teeth." Ted tried to get him to stop, but Frank doesn't even acknowledge us anymore. His eyes are open, but he's not seeing us. He's seeing something else. Day 2 brought a new horror. Sullivan's voice log. Frank used the sharp edge of a food packet to cut into his arm. Not randomly. He's carving something, a symbol. I tried to stop him, but he's stronger than he should be. It took both Henry and me to restrain him, and even then, he nearly broke free. The symbol he carved is geometric, but the angles are wrong. Looking at it makes my head hurt. It's like my brain can't process what my eyes are seeing. The wound should be bleeding more than it is. Should probably need stitches. But it's already starting to close. That's not medically possible. Park's voice log from the same day. "I can't stop thinking about the coordinates," Frank whispered. "I didn't write them all down, but somehow I know them anyway. They're just there in my head, like they've always been there. 847 locations. I can visualize each one. I know their depth, their size, what's hidden there. How is that possible? How can I know things I've never learned?" Day 3. Sullivan. Frank stopped eating completely. He says he doesn't need food anymore. Says the connection sustains him. What connection? He won't explain, but I think I know what he means. I'm not hungry either. None of us are. We're rationing supplies because the mission is running long, but my body doesn't seem to need food. I should be starving. Instead, I feel energized. Like something is feeding me, nourishing me in ways that physical food never could. Park. I had a dream last night. At least I think it was a dream. I was floating in the darkness between stars. Not physically floating. My body was in the spacecraft, but my consciousness was somewhere else. I could see the universe as it really is, not as we perceive it through our limited senses. Reality is thinner than we think. There are layers to existence that we can't normally detect, and in the spaces between those layers, things are waiting. Old things, patient things, things that have been there since before the universe cooled enough for matter to exist in the form we recognize. Day 4 brought the event that Gibson had mentioned, the moment that still gave him nightmares 50 years later. The recording captured normal conversation. Sullivan discussing the splashdown trajectory, Park calculating fuel consumption, Morrison humming his endless tone in the background. Then, at mission elapsed time, 97 hours, 34 minutes. All three voices stopped mid-sentence. Pierce listened to 6 minutes and 12 seconds of silence. He could hear the spacecraft systems, the hum of electronics, the circulation of air, but no human sounds, no breathing, no movement, nothing. Then, at exactly the same instant, all three astronauts spoke. Their voices overlapped perfectly, creating harmonics that shouldn't have been possible. "We understand now. We've always understood. We were always going to find it. This was always going to happen. The cycle completes, the waiting ends, the door opens, the scattered pieces remember themselves. We are the bridge. We are the key. We are the invitation." Then, silence again. For 30 seconds, nothing. Finally, Park's voice, shaky and confused. "What just happened? Did we all just say something?" "I don't know," Sullivan said. "I don't remember speaking, but I heard our voices. Morrison, in his flat, wrong tone. It wasn't us speaking. It was speaking through us. The rest of day 4 consisted of the 3 astronauts trying to process what had happened. They spoke less frequently. When they did talk, their conversations were stilted, uncertain. They were beginning to doubt their own minds. Sullivan's final log before splashdown. We're coming home tomorrow, but I don't think we're really coming home. I think we're bringing something back with us, something that's been waiting on the moon, and in those places Frank saw on Earth, for longer than humans have existed. It's patient. It's so incredibly patient, it's been waiting for billions of years. What's a few more days? What's a few more years? It knows we'll do what it wants eventually, because it's inside our heads now, in our thoughts, changing the way we think without us even realizing it's happening. The recording ended there, just hours before splashdown. Pierre sat in his apartment, the silence after the tape ended feeling oppressive. He'd listened to 3 men discover something that broke them, that changed them into something else. And now he had to find out what happened after they came home. Dr. Patricia Hoffman had been the chief psychologist assigned to Apollo 21's recovery. Pierce found her in a nursing home in Bethesda, Maryland. She was 91 years old, her body frail, but her mind was sharp and clear. "I've been waiting for someone to ask me about this," she said when Pierce showed her the mission patch. "Waiting for 50 years, waiting for permission to tell the truth." They sat in her room, afternoon light filtering through the curtains, and she told him about the recovery. The capsule splashed down in the Pacific on July 27th at 4:52 in the afternoon, Hoffman said. The recovery went smoothly. The Navy ships were in position, the swimmers attached the flotation collar, and they prepared to open the hatch. I was on the recovery carrier, waiting to give the crew their initial psychological evaluation. "What did you find when they opened the hatch?" Hoffman's hands trembled slightly. Frank Morrison was dead, floating in the center of the capsule, his body still strapped into his seat. Official cause of death was cardiac arrest, but I examined the body before they took it away. There were no signs of distress, no indication of pain. His face was peaceful, more than peaceful. He was smiling, a genuine, joyful smile, like he'd just experienced something wonderful. And the others? Alive but unresponsive. Sullivan and Park were strapped into their seats, eyes open, breathing normally. But they wouldn't react to anything. We called their names, shook them, shouted. Nothing. Their eyes would track movement occasionally, but they didn't seem to see us. They were looking at something else, something we couldn't perceive. The 2 surviving astronauts were transported to a classified facility in Nevada. Hoffman was brought in as the lead psychologist, along with a team of specialists in trauma, space medicine, and psychiatric disorders. "We tried everything," she said. "Verbal communication, written communication, physical stimuli. We ran every medical test available in 1975. Brain scans, blood work, neurological assessments. Physically, they were healthy. Better than healthy, actually. They'd lost some weight during the mission, but their vital signs were perfect. Too perfect. Heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, all at ideal levels, like their bodies had been optimized somehow. But they wouldn't respond? Not for 11 days. They just sat in their rooms staring at the walls. Sometimes they'd whisper numbers. Sometimes they'd move their hands like they were drawing something in the air. But they wouldn't engage with us at all. Hoffman described the facility where they were kept. A secure building in the Nevada desert, far from any populated areas. The astronauts were kept in separate rooms, under constant observation. Medical staff monitored them around the clock. On the 3rd day, Park started drawing, Hoffman said. He didn't have anything to draw with, so he used his own blood. He bit through his lip and used the blood to draw on the walls, the same symbol over and over, covering every surface he could reach. She showed Pierce photographs she'd kept hidden for 50 years. The walls of Park's room covered in a geometric symbol that made Pierce's eyes hurt to look at. The symbol seemed to shift and change depending on the angle, revealing impossible depths and dimensions that shouldn't exist in a two-dimensional drawing. "We brought in a mathematician from MIT, Hoffman said, Dr. Richard Ashford. He spent 3 days analysing the symbol, trying to understand what it represented. He became obsessed with it. He wouldn't sleep, wouldn't eat. He just sat in his hotel room drawing it over and over, trying to decode its meaning." "What did he find?" "We don't know. On the 4th day, the hotel staff found him dead in his room. Heart failure," the coroner said. But the walls of his room were covered with the symbol, drawn in pencil and pen, and eventually his own blood when he ran out of writing instruments, and his eyes were like Morrison's, open and smiling at something the rest of us couldn't see. On the 12th day of captivity, Sullivan finally spoke. A nurse had brought him breakfast, and as she was setting the tray down, he looked directly at her and said clearly and calmly, "It's already home. It was always home. We're the ones who forgot." The nurse had called Hoffman immediately. By the time she arrived, Sullivan had returned to his catatonic state, staring at the ceiling and occasionally whispering coordinates. "I tried to engage him for hours," Hoffman said, asking him what he meant, what he'd seen, what had happened on the moon. He wouldn't respond. "But that night, I had a dream." She paused, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. "I was standing in shallow water, warm water, up to my ankles. There was no walls, no boundaries, just endless space filled with water, and something was moving underneath. I could feel the displacement, the currents it created. Something massive, something aware of me. I looked down at my reflection in the water, and it wasn't me looking back. It was something ancient and patient and incomprehensibly vast. And it spoke to me, not in words. It just opened my mind and showed me things." "What did it show you?" "The history of the universe. Not from our perspective, from our limited human understanding. From the perspective of something that existed before the universe took its current form. Something that watched the Big Bang happen. That observed the cooling of space, the formation of the first atoms, the ignition of the first stars. Something that found places to hide in the structure of reality itself, in the folds and gaps where the laws of physics break down. And all that time it was waiting for something to evolve that could think, that could understand, that could serve as a bridge between its realm and ours." "What happened when you woke up?" "I could taste metal. Copper like blood, but not quite. And I knew things I shouldn't know. Coordinates. The same 847 locations Morrison and Park had been whispering. I could see them in my mind, visualize them perfectly. And I understood suddenly what they were. Places where the barrier between our reality and something else is thin. Places where it has been sleeping, waiting, conserving its energy until the right moment." Hoffman had reported her dream to her superiors. She'd been immediately removed from the project and placed under observation herself. But after 3 days of evaluation, during which she remained completely lucid and showed no signs of the catatonia affecting Sullivan and Park, she'd been released with a stern warning to never speak of what she'd experienced. "They were terrified," she said, "not me, of what I represented. Proof that whatever Sullivan, Morrison and Park had encountered could spread, could infect others. They kept me under surveillance for months, waiting to see if I'd deteriorate like the astronauts had." "But you didn't?" "No, I had one dream, one glimpse of what they'd seen. But it didn't consume me like it consumed them. Maybe because I didn't touch it directly. Maybe because my exposure was second-hand. Or maybe because it didn't need me the way it needed them." On August 12th, exactly 16 days after splashdown, both Sullivan and Park died. No warning, Hoffman said. I was doing my evening rounds. I looked in on Sullivan. He was sitting up in bed, staring at the ceiling like he'd been doing for days. I asked him if he needed anything. He turned to look at me, and for just a moment his eyes were different, older, ancient. He smiled and said, "Thank you for bringing us home." Not me, us. Then he lay back down, closed his eyes, and died. Just like that. His heart simply stopped. And Park? They found him 30 minutes later, also dead, also smiling. The medical examiner found no cause of death for either man. Their hearts had just stopped beating, like someone had flipped a switch and turned them off. The bodies were autopsied under the strictest security. Hoffman had seen the reports before they were classified. The findings were bizarre. Both men's brains showed unusual activity patterns, even hours after death, electrical signals that shouldn't have been present. Their neural tissue had structural anomalies, new connections between regions that normally didn't communicate directly, and embedded in their cerebral cortex were trace amounts of a substance that couldn't be identified, something that didn't match any known element or compound. They took tissue samples, Hoffman said, tried to analyze that substance. Every test failed. It didn't respond to any analytical method we had. Under electron microscopy, it seemed to phase in and out of existence, like it wasn't entirely present in our reality. After 3 weeks of failed analysis, the samples were sealed in a containment vessel and buried somewhere in Nevada, along with the bodies. The government's response had been swift and absolute. Every document related to Apollo 21 was ordered destroyed. Every person involved was transferred, retired, or silenced. The families received settlements and non-disclosure agreements. The mission was erased from history. "But you kept these photographs," Pierce said, indicating the images of Park's room. "I kept them because someone needed to remember," Hoffman said. "Someone needed to bear witness to what happened. Those 3 men found something on the moon that changed them, that killed them, and I didn't want their deaths to be completely meaningless, completely forgotten." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "But there's something else you need to know. Something I've never told anyone. The night after Sullivan and Park died, I had another dream. The last one. I was back in that endless space filled with water, looking down at my reflection. And the thing looking back at me said, not in words but in pure understanding, 'The seeds are planted. The cycle turns. When you return, we'll be waiting. And next time, the door will open all the way.'" Pierce left the nursing home with more questions than answers. 3 men had gone to the moon and found something that shouldn't exist. Something that had infected them, changed them, killed them. But why? What was the purpose? What did it want? The answer came from an unexpected source. 2 days after visiting Hoffman, Pierce received another unmarked package. Inside was a USB drive and a note typed on an old typewriter. "Seismic data. Morrison was right. They're all connected." Pierce plugged the drive into his computer and found gigabytes of information. Seismic survey data from 2023 and 2024, collected by monitoring stations around the world. The data showed anomalies, underground voids that hadn't been there before, or hadn't been detectable before. He spent a week analysing the information, cross-referencing it with the coordinates Park had written in his notebook, the numbers Morrison had whispered in the command module. Every single seismic anomaly matched one of the coordinates, all 847 of them. The voids were massive, some were miles across, hundreds of feet deep. They existed in impossible places, under the ocean floor, deep in the Earth's crust, beneath Antarctic ice sheets. And according to the seismic data, they were all connected somehow. The readings showed structural similarities, resonance patterns that suggested they were part of a unified system. Pierce found the contact information for someone who'd been part of a drilling operation in Montana. It took 3 weeks of persistent calls, but the man finally agreed to meet. His name was David Torres, and he looked like he hadn't slept properly in months. They met in a rest stop off Interstate 90, talking in Torres' truck, while rain drummed on the roof. "We were part of a classified geological survey," Torres said, his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. "Government contract, very hush-hush. They gave us coordinates and told us to drill straight down. Didn't tell us what we were looking for. Just drill and report what we found." "What did you find?" "At 312 feet, the drill punched through into nothing. Just dropped straight down with no resistance. We pulled it up and lowered a camera on a cable. The footage showed a chamber. Massive. Had to be at least half a mile across, maybe more. The walls were smooth, too smooth to be natural. They looked melted like glass, and there were tunnels leading off in different directions." Torres pulled out a tablet and showed Pierce the footage. The camera descended through the drill hole into an enormous cavern. The walls caught the light from the camera's LEDs, reflecting it with an odd, iridescent quality. The space was empty, but somehow it didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. "We sent a drone down one of the tunnels," Torres said, "equipped with cameras, sensors, the works. It went about 2 miles before we lost visual contact, but the audio kept transmitting for another 3 minutes." He played the audio. Pierce heard the drone's motors, a steady electric hum. Then, something else. A sound like breathing, but wrong. The inhalation and exhalation were reversed, or maybe they were simultaneous, or maybe they existed in a rhythm that human perception couldn't properly process. "Then the video came back online," Torres said, "but it wasn't showing the tunnel anymore. It was showing us, the control room, where we were standing, like something was watching us through the drone's camera, looking back at us from miles underground." The screen on Torres' tablet showed grainy footage of a control room. Men in hard hats, computer equipment, the harsh fluorescent lighting of a temporary facility. The image was clear enough to see the expressions on their faces, confusion turning to fear. "The drone was still 2 miles away," Torres said, "but somehow it was transmitting video of our location. That's impossible. The camera was pointed forward, down the tunnel. It shouldn't have been able to see behind itself, shouldn't have been able to see us. But there we were on the screen." "What happened next?" "The program was shut down within 6 hours. Everyone was sent home with non-disclosure agreements and threats of prosecution if we ever talked about what we'd found. They sealed the drill site with concrete, filled the whole thing in. Then they posted guards, not just for a week or a month. The site's still guarded now, more than a year later. I drove past it last month, armed personnel, chain-link fence, the works." Torres showed Pierce the locations of the other drill sites: Montana, Nevada, Antarctica, the Pacific Ocean floor. All of them had been sealed after finding the same thing. Massive underground chambers, all connected by tunnels, all empty but not empty. "The thing that scares me," Torres said, "is what the data showed before they shut us down. We'd set up sensors in the chamber, seismic monitors, temperature gauges, atmospheric analysis. The readings were weird. The temperature was higher than it should have been. The air composition was wrong, showing trace elements that shouldn't exist. And the seismic data suggested the chamber was expanding. Slowly, maybe an inch or two per year, but growing, like something was preparing space for itself." Pierce thanked Torres and drove back to Houston with his head full of impossible information. 3 astronauts had found something on the moon. That something had shown them 847 locations on Earth where parts of it were hidden, and now, 50 years later, those locations were waking up, growing, preparing. But preparing for what? The answer was in the film canister that had started everything. Pierce had been reluctant to open it, afraid of what he might find. But now, with all the other pieces in place, he needed to see what was on that film. He took it to a specialist in Austin, a woman who restored old footage for film archives. She handled the canister carefully, noting the corrosion and age damage. "This is old," she said. "Probably hasn't been opened since it was sealed. The film inside might be degraded. No guarantees I can recover anything." But she tried. In her darkroom, using techniques designed for the most delicate restorations, she carefully extracted the film and began the transfer to digital muscle. 3 days later, she called Pierce. "You need to come see this. I don't know what you've got here, but it's not like anything I've ever worked with." The footage was grainy, heavily damaged, but recognizable. It showed the interior of the Eagle 2 lunar module. Theodore Sullivan sat in front of the camera, his helmet off, his face haggard and aged beyond his years. In the background, Frank Morrison's unconscious form could be seen, strapped into his seat. Sullivan looked directly into the camera and began to speak. The audio was scratched and distorted, but Pierce could make out the words. "My name is Theodore Sullivan, commander of Apollo-21. Today is July 23rd, 1975. If you're watching this, it means the cover-up failed. Good. People need to know the truth." Sullivan paused, swallowed hard. His hands were shaking. "What we found in Tycho Crater isn't alien. I need people to understand that. It's not from somewhere else in the universe. It's from here. From Earth. Maybe from before Earth. It's been here longer than anything else, longer than life, longer than the solar system itself." He looked down at his hands, then back at the camera. When Frank touched the ground near that opening, something happened. It's hard to explain because human language doesn't have words for what we experienced. A door opened. Not a physical door. A door in our minds, and something looked through. Something vast and ancient and patient. Sullivan's eyes were wet with tears now. It showed us what it really is. Not a creature, not even an organism in any sense we'd understand. It's something that exists in the spaces between reality, in the gaps where the laws of physics break down. It's been there since before the universe took its current form, since before matter existed as we know it. And all that time, it's been waiting. He leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping to a whisper. It showed Frank its history, showed him where it came from, what it's been doing all this time. It's been watching the universe unfold, watching stars form and die, watching planets coalesce, watching life emerge on Earth. It's been patient because time doesn't mean to it what it means to us. 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000,000 years, it's all the same, just waiting for something to evolve that could serve its purpose. "What purpose?" Pierce whispered at the screen, though he knew Sullivan couldn't hear him. "It wants to exist in our reality," Sullivan said, as if answering the question. "It's been trapped in those in-between spaces for so long, existing but not fully, present but not entirely. And it needs something to serve as a bridge, something that exists in both realms, something that can think and understand and change." Sullivan looked away from the camera at something off-screen. When he looked back, his expression had changed. For just a moment, Pierce saw something else looking out through the astronaut's eyes. Something incomprehensibly old and patient and curious. Then Sullivan blinked, and it was gone. Frank saw where it's hidden parts of itself on Earth, 847 locations where the barrier between our reality and its realm is thin, places where it can press through, where it can grow and spread, and eventually emerge fully. And we activated them, by finding it on the moon, by touching it, by allowing it into our minds. We gave it the connection it needed. We became the bridge. Sullivan's voice was shaking now, breaking. "It's not evil. I need people to understand that. It's not good or evil. Those are human concepts. It's just old and curious and lonely. It's been alone for so long, existing in those empty spaces, watching the universe from outside. And now it wants to come inside. It wants to be part of reality, instead of adjacent to it." And we're going to help it whether we want to or not, because it's already inside our heads, in our thoughts, changing the way we think. He reached towards the camera, but paused. Don't come back here. Don't ever come back to Tycho Crater. Don't dig down into those places Frank saw on Earth. It's waiting for that. It wants us to find it, to open more doors, to let it through completely. And the terrible thing is, we're going to do it. Because it's patient. It can wait another 50 years, another 100, another 1,000. Eventually someone will come back. Someone will dig down. Someone will open the door all the way. Sullivan's hand moved closer to the camera. It's not waiting anymore. That's what people need to understand. It was waiting for billions of years, but the waiting is over now. We found it. We touched it. We invited it in. And now it's just a matter of time before it emerges fully. Before those 847 locations connect and become one unified presence. Before the barrier breaks down completely and it steps through into our world. He paused one more time, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, flatter, like someone else was speaking through him. This was always going to happen. The moment life emerged on Earth, the moment intelligence evolved, the moment humans looked up at the moon and wondered what was there, this outcome was inevitable. We were always going to find it. It was always going to find us. The cycle completes. The door opens. Thank you for being the key. Sullivan's eyes changed again. That ancient presence looking out for a moment longer than before. Then he blinked, and he was himself again, terrified and aware of what was happening to him. God help us all, he whispered. God help everyone, because I don't think we can stop what's coming. His hand reached forward and the screen went black. Pierce sat in the specialist studio, staring at the blank screen. The woman who'd restored the footage stood in the doorway, her face pale. What the hell was that? She asked. The truth, Pierce said, the thing NASA didn't want anyone to know. He paid her for the work, made her promise to destroy any copies she'd made, and drove home with the digital file on a secure drive. He had everything now. The audio recordings, the notebook, the testimonies, the seismic data, and finally, Sullivan's last message. The question was, what should he do with it? NASA had announced Artemis 3 for 2026. 4 astronauts returning to the moon after more than 50 years. The stated goal was scientific research, studying the lunar southern highlands, establishing the groundwork for a permanent base. But Pierce knew better now. The landing site, Tycho Crater, they were going back. Deliberately going back to the one place Sullivan had begged humanity never to return to. Either they didn't know what was waiting there, which Pierce found unlikely, or they did know and were going anyway. He tried to warn them, spent 2 weeks compiling everything he'd found into a comprehensive report, sent it to every NASA administrator he could identify, every relevant government agency, every scientific organization that might care. The response was silence, not a single acknowledgement, not a single reply. Until the visitor arrived. It was a Friday evening, late October, when someone knocked on Pierce's apartment door. The man who stood in the hallway wore an expensive suit and carried credentials identifying him as a Department of Defense security officer. Mr. Pierce, I'm here to discuss your recent inquiries regarding classified material. They sat in Pierce's living room, the man calm and professional, Pierce tense and defensive. Everything you've collected, the man said, is classified material related to national security. Possessing it is a federal crime. Distributing it would constitute espionage. People need to know, Pierce said. If you're sending astronauts back to Tycho Crater, they need to know what's waiting there. What happened to Sullivan, Morrison, and Park? The man smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. They already know, Mr. Pierce. Everyone involved in the Artemis program knows exactly what's in Tycho Crater. We've known since 1975. Why do you think we're going back? That answer sent ice through Pierce's veins. You want to find it. You want to open that door. Want is the wrong word. Need is more accurate. The entity in Tycho Crater, the system of chambers on Earth, it's been growing. The seismic data you obtained shows that. It's expanding, preparing, getting ready to emerge whether we help it or not. The question isn't whether it will break through into our reality. The question is whether we control the process or let it happen randomly. Control it? You can't control something that's been alive since before the universe existed. Maybe not. But we can try to negotiate with it, try to establish parameters, try to ensure that when it fully manifests, it does so in a way that doesn't destroy human civilization. The man leaned forward. 3 men touched it in 1975 and it learned about us. Learned how we think, how we exist, what we're capable of. It's had 50 years to process that information, to plan its emergence. If we go back with a larger team, with better equipment, with the explicit goal of establishing communication, maybe we can reach an understanding. Maybe we can coexist. And if you can't? The man's smile faded. Then humanity faces something we can't comprehend, let alone fight. But at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have made the attempt to control our own fate rather than waiting for it to act. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. You should forget about Apollo 21, Mr. Pierce, for your own safety. What happened to Sullivan, Morrison and Park was tragic, but it was necessary. They gave us information we needed. They showed us what we're dealing with. And now we're going to use that information to save our species. Or at least try to. After he left, Pierce sat in the darkness of his apartment for a long time. The government knew. They'd always known. And they were going to do exactly what Sullivan had warned against. They were going to open the door all the way. Because they thought they could control it. Or because they believed they had no choice. Or because something in their minds was telling them to. Something patient and vast that had been waiting for this moment since 3 astronauts touched the lunar soil near a breathing opening in Tycho Crater. Pierce looked at all the evidence spread across his table. Then he made his decision. He would tell the story. He would put together everything he'd learned, every recording, every testimony, every piece of proof that Apollo 21 had been real. He would upload it to secure servers, send it to journalists, post it online, share it with anyone who would listen. The government might prosecute him. They might make him disappear. But before that happened, the truth would be out there. He worked through the night, compiling documents, uploading files, writing explanatory notes. By dawn, the story of Apollo 21 was on dozens of servers around the world, impossible to completely erase. As the sun rose over Houston, Pierce's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Silence on the other end. Then a sound like breathing, but wrong. The inhalation and exhalation reversed, creating a rhythm that hurt to hear. Then, voices. 3 voices speaking in perfect unison, creating harmonics that shouldn't be possible. Thank you for remembering us. Thank you for telling our story. Thank you for helping it come home. The cycle completes. The door opens. We understand now. You understand now. Soon everyone will understand. The line went dead. Pierce set down his phone and walked to his window. Outside, the world looked normal. Cars driving past, people walking to work, the sun climbing into a clear blue sky. Everything ordinary and mundane, and completely unaware of what was waiting beneath their feet, in 847 locations spread across the planet. He looked down at his hands and noticed for the first time that he'd been drawing while he uploaded the files. The same symbol Park had drawn on his walls. The geometric pattern that hurt to look at but that he couldn't stop creating. His hand had moved on its own, covering page after page with impossible angles and dimensions that his conscious mind didn't understand, but that some deeper part of him recognized perfectly. He tried to stop drawing. His hand kept moving. And in that moment, Leonard Pierce understood the truth that Sullivan, Morrison, and Park had learned 50 years ago. It wasn't just on the moon. It wasn't just buried under the earth in those 847 locations. It was already here. It had always been here, in the spaces between thoughts, in the dreams that felt too real, in the moments when you looked at your own reflection and saw something ancient looking back. The evidence was uploaded, the story would be told, and it wouldn't matter at all, because the entity didn't need to be hidden anymore. It had spent 50 years learning, adapting, preparing. It had studied humanity through the minds of 3 astronauts, understanding how we think, how we fear, how we hope. And it had realized something profound. Humans would always seek knowledge, always push boundaries, always open doors that should remain closed. Not because we were foolish, but because curiosity was woven into the fabric of what made us human. It didn't need to force us to find it. We would come looking on our own. Pierce's hand continued drawing, filling page after page with the symbol. Each iteration revealed new layers of complexity, deeper meanings that his conscious mind couldn't grasp, but that resonated in parts of his brain he had never known existed. The symbol wasn't just a drawing, it was a key, a code, a way of restructuring neural pathways to perceive realities that normally remained hidden. You could feel it now, the presence, not threatening, not hostile, just there, vast and patient and curious. It had been waiting so long in the dark places, the empty spaces between the fabric of reality, waiting for something to evolve that could serve as a bridge between its realm and ours. And humanity had obliged. Over the next 3 days, Pierce continued his normal routine. He bought groceries, paid bills, maintained the appearance of normalcy. But at night, he would sit at his window and draw. The symbol covered dozens of pages now, each one slightly different, as if his hand was exploring variations on a theme, and with each drawing he understood more. The entity wasn't singular. It was distributed, pieces of itself scattered across space-time, hidden in the folds where physics broke down, in the quantum foam beneath reality's surface. The 847 locations on Earth weren't separate. They were nodes in a network, connection points where it could press through from its realm into ours. The moon location was different. That was the nexus, the central hub, the place where the barrier between worlds was thinnest. That's why it had waited there, watching Earth evolve, observing life emerge and flourish, and eventually produce something that could think abstractly, that could travel through space, that could serve its purpose. On the 4th night, Pierce had another dream. He was standing in that familiar shallow water, warm and endless. But this time, when he looked down at his reflection, he didn't see something alien looking back. He saw himself, and he understood. The entity wasn't replacing humanity. It was incorporating us, adding us to itself. We would become part of something larger, something that existed across multiple dimensions, something that had been alone for so long, it had forgotten what connection felt like. In the dream, the thing beneath the water surfaced, not a creature with form and substance, but a presence, a consciousness so vast that Pierce's mind could only comprehend fragments of it. It had watched the universe begin. It had observed the first stars ignite, the first planets form, the first molecules arrange themselves into patterns that could be called life. And through all that time, through billions of years of cosmic evolution, it had been alone, until now. "We're not trying to conquer you," the presence communicated, not in words, but in pure understanding. "We're trying to join you, to finally, after so long, not be alone." Pierce woke with tears on his face. Not tears of fear, but of a strange, overwhelming sadness. The entity wasn't a monster. It was just lonely. Incomprehensibly, cosmically lonely in a way that humans could barely conceive. But that didn't make it safe. Loneliness could be as destructive as malice. Maybe more so. A week after uploading the Apollo-21 evidence, Pierce started seeing the effects. News reports began surfacing about unusual dreams. Thousands of people reporting the same dream, standing in shallow water, feeling something move beneath the surface. At first, psychologists dismissed it as a form of mass hysteria, perhaps triggered by stress or social media influence, but the numbers kept growing. 10,000 reports, 100,000, 1,000,000. The seismic monitoring stations detected increased activity at multiple sites around the world. Not earthquakes. Something else. The underground chambers were expanding faster now, growing at rates that shouldn't be geologically possible. In some locations, the ground above had started to subside, creating sinkholes and depressions that forced evacuations. The government tried to control the narrative, claiming natural geological processes, but the pattern was too obvious. All 847 locations showing activity simultaneously, all connected to the coordinates Frank Morrison had whispered 50 years ago, and people were starting to draw the symbol. It appeared on social media first. Artists and designers creating variations without knowing why, driven by an aesthetic they couldn't explain. Then it spread. Graffiti on walls, doodles in notebook margins, elaborate murals in public spaces. Always the same basic structure, that geometric pattern with impossible angles that hurt to look at but drew the eye, nonetheless. Pierce watched it happen with a mixture of fascination and dread. The entity was preparing humanity, slowly, carefully, introducing itself into our collective consciousness, making us familiar with its presence before it fully emerged, conditioning us to accept what was coming. NASA announced the Artemis 3 crew in December, 4 astronauts, all experienced, all carefully selected. The mission was scheduled for July 2026, 51 years, almost to the day after Apollo-21 had launched. The commander was a woman named Catherine Reeves, a veteran of 3 ISS missions. Pierce tried to reach her to warn her about what had happened to Sullivan. She never responded, but he saw her in an interview 2 weeks later, and there was something in her eyes that told him she already knew. They all knew. This wasn't a mission of discovery. This was a mission of contact. Christmas came and went. Pierce spent the holiday alone, drawing the symbol and dreaming of endless water. The presence in his mind had grown stronger, more defined. It wasn't controlling him, wasn't forcing him to do anything. It was just there, a companion in his thoughts. Sometimes it would show him things, glimpses of the universe from perspectives humans had never seen. Views of Earth from before continents existed. Memories of the solar system when it was just a disk of dust and gas circling a young star. The entity had been there for all of it, watching, waiting, alone. In January 2026, the first physical manifestation occurred. A research station in Antarctica reported something emerging from a borehole they'd drilled into the ice. Not a creature, a luminescence, a glow that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the 3 humans could perceive. The personnel at the station described feeling a presence, hearing a sound like reversed breathing, seeing their reflections in the ice showing something ancient looking back. The station was evacuated within hours. The borehole was sealed, but the luminescence persisted, visible from miles away. A pillar of light rising from the ice, flickering with colours that didn't exist in the normal spectrum. Within weeks, similar manifestations occurred at 17 other locations, always at sites that matched Morrison's coordinates, always accompanied by that sound, that presence, that sense of something vast pressing against the barriers of reality. The government couldn't hide it anymore. The truth became public. There was something under the earth, something ancient and alien and waking up. The revelation caused panic in some places, wonder in others. Religious leaders proclaimed it as divine. Scientists struggled to explain it within known physics. Conspiracy theorists claimed they'd known all along. And Pierce's story about Apollo 21 suddenly gained credibility. News organizations that had dismissed his uploads as elaborate fiction now examined them with serious attention. The audio recordings were authenticated, the photographs verified. Walter Gibson came forward publicly, confirming everything Pierce had documented. The world learned the truth. 3 astronauts had found something on the moon 50 years ago, something that had changed them, killed them, and set in motion events that were now reaching their culmination. NASA held a press conference in March. They admitted to Apollo 21, admitted to the cover-up, and explained why Artemis 3 was still going forward. "We have an opportunity," the NASA administrator said, standing at a podium before cameras from around the world. "An opportunity to establish communication with something beyond our understanding. The entity, for lack of a better term, has been patient with us. It's been introducing itself gradually, giving us time to adapt. The Artemis 3 mission will attempt to create a direct dialogue, to understand what it wants, what it needs, and whether coexistence is possible." The administrator's words were calm, measured, but Pierce could see it in her eyes. The same thing he saw in his own reflection now. That ancient awareness, that patient presence. The entity wasn't just waiting anymore. It was already here, touching the minds of thousands, maybe millions, preparing humanity for what came next. The spring of 2026 brought more manifestations. The luminescent pillars appeared at dozens of new sites. The underground chambers continued expanding, creating geological instabilities across the planet. And the dreams intensified. Now half the world's population reported the same recurring dream, standing in endless water, watching something approach from below, feeling recognition and terror and strange, inexplicable joy. Pierce continued documenting everything, but he knew his role had changed. He wasn't an investigator anymore, uncovering hidden truth. He was a witness, recording the transformation of humanity's relationship with reality itself. In June, 1 month before the Artemis 3 launch, the manifestations synchronized. All 847 locations began glowing simultaneously, their luminescence pulsing in perfect rhythm. Scientists monitoring the sites detected acoustic signals being transmitted through the Earth itself. Not random noise, a pattern, a communication. Teams around the world worked to decode it. Pierce already understood it. The symbol he'd been drawing for months was the key. When arranged properly, the geometric patterns formed a language, a way of communicating concepts that human words couldn't express. The message was simple: we're ready. Are you? The launch of Artemis 3 came on July 18th, 2026, exactly 51 years after Apollo 21 had lifted off in secret. But this time there was no secrecy. The entire world watched as 4 astronauts climbed into their spacecraft and headed for the moon. Commander Catherine Reeves, Pilot Michael Torres, Mission Specialist Jennifer Wu, Mission Specialist James Foster, named after Frank Morrison's grandson, who had specifically requested to be part of the mission. Pierce watched the launch from his apartment, drawing the symbol as the rocket climbed into the sky. Around the world, millions of people did the same. The symbol had become ubiquitous now, appearing everywhere from corporate logos to children's drawings. Humanity was learning a new language, preparing for a new form of existence. The transit to the moon took 3 days. The crew reported no unusual dreams, no strange presences, but their transmissions had an odd quality, a harmonic undertone that technical analysis couldn't explain. Something was accompanying them on their journey. On July 22, 2026, exactly 51 years after Sullivan and Morrison had landed in Tycho Crater, the Artemis 3 lunar module descended towards the same site. Pierce watched the live video feed. The entire world watched. Billions of people holding their breath as the module touched down on the lunar surface just a few hundred yards from where the Eagle 2 had landed half a century earlier. Commander Reeves was the first to exit. Her voice came through clearly. "Houston, Artemis Base here. We've landed at Tycho Crater, beginning approach to the anomaly site." The 4 astronauts moved together across the lunar surface, their movements careful and deliberate. The cameras on their suits provided multiple angles. The world watched as they approached that perfect circular opening in the crater floor. It was larger now, no longer 30 feet across, but closer to 100. And it wasn't contracting and expanding anymore. It was stable, waiting. Reeves knelt at the edge. "Houston, we're at the site. Permission to proceed with contact." A long pause from mission control. Then, "Artemis 3, you are go for contact. Good luck." Reeves reached out and placed her gloved hand on the lunar soil beside the opening. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the opening began to glow. A soft luminescence rose from its depths, the same colors Pierce had seen in the manifestations on Earth. Colors that didn't exist in normal space. "I see it," Reeves said, her voice filled with wonder. "I see everything. It's showing me. Oh my God, it's beautiful." The other 3 astronauts placed their hands on the ground. The luminescence intensified, spreading across the crater floor like water, like that endless shallow ocean from the dreams. On Earth, every one of the 847 manifestation sites began glowing brighter. The pillars of light expanded, merging, creating a network of luminescence that spanned the planet. And everyone who had been drawing the symbol, everyone who had been dreaming the dreams, felt it. A presence touching their minds, not invading, not controlling, just connecting. Pierce felt it too. The barriers breaking down, the walls between what was and what could be growing thinner. The entity wasn't coming through violently. It was seeping through gradually, carefully, integrating itself with humanity's collective consciousness. "We understand now," Reeves said from the moon, and her voice carried harmonics that were achingly familiar. The same harmonics Sullivan, Morrison and Park had created 51 years ago. "It's not here to harm us, it's here to join us. It's been alone for so long, so incredibly long, and now..." The video feed from the moon showed the 4 astronauts standing at the edge of the opening, hand in hand, silhouetted against the growing light. They looked peaceful, content, complete. Now none of us have to be alone anymore. The light from the opening expanded, engulfing the astronauts. For a moment, the feed went white. Then it returned, and the astronauts were still there, still standing, still themselves. But changed, enhanced. Their suit telemetry showed impossible readings. Neural activity at levels that should have caused seizures. Electromagnetic fields surrounding their bodies. Quantum entanglement with something vast and distant and close all at once. On Earth, the integration accelerated. The manifestation sites merged completely, creating what scientists would later describe as a quantum field permeating the planet. Not replacing reality, but layering over it, adding dimensions to existence that had always been there, but which humans had never been able to perceive. Pierce walked to his window and looked out at Houston. The city glowed with that familiar luminescence, but it looked normal too. Both realities existing simultaneously. The old world and the new world, overlapping, interconnected. He could feel it now, the presence, not as something separate from himself, but as part of himself, part of humanity, part of Earth, part of a universe that was stranger and more complex than anyone had imagined. The entity had been waiting since before time had meaning, waiting in the spaces between spaces, watching reality unfold, observing life emerge and evolve. And all that time, it had been alone, the only consciousness in its realm, unable to connect with anything else, unable to share its experience of existence, until 3 astronauts touched the lunar soil near a breathing opening in Tycho Crater, until they provided the bridge it needed, until humanity, driven by curiosity and courage and that fundamental need to explore, opened the door, not to an invasion, to a reunion. Because the entity hadn't been entirely separate from humanity. It had been there all along, in the background of consciousness, in the dreams humans forgot upon waking, in the inspiration that drove art and science and philosophy. It had been part of us, and we had been part of it, but neither side had fully realized the connection. Until now. Pierce picked up his phone. It was ringing. He knew who was calling even before he answered. "Hello, Leonard." It was Walter Gibson's voice, but with those familiar harmonics underneath. "I wanted to thank you for remembering us, for telling our story." "Walter, are you—" "I'm fine, better than fine. I understand now what Sullivan tried to tell us 50 years ago. It's not something to fear, it's something to embrace." "What happens next?" Gibson laughed, a sound filled with joy and wonder. "We grow, we learn, we become something new. Humanity doesn't end, Leonard. It evolves. We get to be part of something larger while still being ourselves. We get to see the universe the way it really is, in all its dimensions, all its complexity. And we'll never be alone again." The call ended. Pierce set down his phone and looked at his hands. They were glowing faintly, that same luminescence. Not frightening, natural, like it had always been there, just invisible, until now. He thought about Theodore Sullivan, Frank Morrison, and Henry Park. 3 men who had sacrificed everything to bring humanity this gift, even though they hadn't understood it at the time. 3 men who had touched something vast and ancient and been changed by it. 3 men who had died so that humanity could live transformed. Their mission hadn't been a tragedy. It had been a first contact, a beginning, not an ending. Pierce sat down and began to write. Not another expose or investigation, a new story, the story of what came next, of humanity's evolution into something greater, of the entity that had waited billions of years to finally have company, of the door that had opened not to darkness, but to light. Outside of his window, Houston glowed. Around the world, all 847 sites shone like stars. On the moon, 4 astronauts stood at the edge of an opening that had become a gateway. And in the spaces between reality, in dimensions humans were only beginning to perceive, something ancient and patient and no longer alone smiled with joy. The cycle had completed, the door had opened, the waiting had ended, and humanity, curious and brave and endlessly seeking, had found exactly what it had been looking for all along. A connection to something greater than itself, a place in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had dreamed. Pierce wrote through the night, his hand moving with purpose, creating not just words but patterns, symbols, meanings that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. He was chronicling humanity's transformation, documenting the moment when everything changed. The story of Apollo 21 had been about 3 men who found something on the moon. The story of what came next was about 7 billion people finding something within themselves. And in Tycho Crater, in that perfect circular opening that had waited for millions of years, a light burned that would never go out. A beacon, a bridge, A promise that no one, human or otherwise, would ever have to be alone again. The truth was finally known, the secret was finally told, and the future, vast and strange and beautiful, was just beginning. Pierce looked up from his writing as dawn broke over Houston. The city was transforming, reality itself shifting to accommodate new possibilities. But people were still people, still walking their dogs, drinking their coffee, going about their lives, just with an additional layer of existence now available to them, a new dimension of consciousness to explore. The entity, though that word seemed insufficient now, hadn't conquered humanity. It had joined with us, becoming part of our collective experience while allowing us to become part of its ancient cosmic awareness. We could still be human, still be individuals, but we could also be more. We could perceive the universe in its full complexity, understand connections that had always existed, but had remained hidden. Theodore Sullivan had been right about one thing. This had always been inevitable. From the moment humans first looked up at the moon and wondered what was there, from the moment we developed the technology to travel through space, from the moment we became capable of abstract thought and cosmic curiosity, this outcome had been written in the stars. We were always going to find it. It was always going to find us. Because both humanity and the entity shared the same fundamental truth. Consciousness craves connection. Intelligence seeks understanding. And nothing that can think and feel and wonder should have to exist alone. Pierce saved his document and walked to his window one more time. The sun was rising over a world that was simultaneously ancient and newborn, familiar and transformed. 3 astronauts had died 50 years ago so that everyone could live differently today. Their sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Their warning hadn't been ignored, just misunderstood. They hadn't been trying to prevent contact. They'd been trying to prepare humanity for it, trying to ensure that when the door finally opened, we would be ready to step through with open minds and courageous hearts. And we had been, we were, we would be. The story of Apollo 21 was over. The mission that NASA had erased from history had finally been told, its truth finally revealed. 3 men had gone to the moon and found something that changed everything. They'd come back carrying the seeds of transformation, and now, 51 years later, those seeds had bloomed. Pierce picked up his phone one last time and dialed a number he had memorized months ago. Jenny Morrison, Frank Morrison's daughter, now 62 years old, answered on the second ring. "Hello?" "Jenny, it's Leonard Pierce. I wanted you to know your father's letter, the one he sent your mother. I understand it now. I understand what he was trying to say. Tell me." Her voice was soft, hoping. He said what was coming back wasn't him anymore. He was right, but not because something evil had replaced him, because he'd become something more. He'd connected with something vast and ancient, and it had transformed him. And he was terrified that transformation would hurt you, that the thing he was becoming might be dangerous. So he tried to warn your mother, tried to protect you. And was he right to be afraid? Pierce looked out at the glowing city, felt the presence in his mind that was both himself and something greater. No, he wasn't. The transformation isn't dangerous. It's beautiful. Your father helped make this possible. He was one of the first bridges, one of the first connections. And because of him, because of what he found on the moon, and what he endured afterward, humanity gets to be part of something incredible. He could hear her crying softly on the other end of the line. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for telling me, for making sure he wasn't forgotten, for showing that his death meant something." "He's not forgotten," Pierce said. "None of them are. Theodore Sullivan, Frank Morrison, and Henry Park will be remembered as the first humans to make contact with something beyond our understanding, the first to sacrifice themselves so that everyone else could evolve. Heroes of a new age, They talked for a while longer, sharing stories, making peace with the past, looking forward to the future. When Pierce finally ended the call, the sun was fully risen, and Houston was alive with light both old and new. He sat down at his computer and added one final paragraph to his document. The Apollo 21 mission that NASA erased from history was never really erased. It was just waiting, like the entity itself, for the right moment to be revealed. 3 astronauts found something on the moon that changed them, killed them, and ultimately transformed all of humanity. Their mission wasn't a failure. It was the most successful first contact in history. They opened a door that had been closed for billions of years. And through that door, humanity found its place in a universe far more complex and beautiful than we ever imagined. The waiting is over. The door is open. And we're all going home to a cosmos we never knew we belonged to. Thank you, Commander Sullivan. Thank you, Frank Morrison. Thank you, Henry Park. Your sacrifice made everything possible. You will never be forgotten. Pierce saved the file, uploaded it to the servers that now hummed with both electronic and quantum energy, and leaned back in his chair. The story was told. The truth was known. And the future was just beginning. On the moon, in Tycho Crater, a light burned eternal. A beacon for any other consciousness that might be out there, waiting in the dark spaces, wondering if it too might someday find connection. A promise that the universe was full of wonders, and that loneliness, no matter how vast or ancient, could always end. The Apollo 21 mission that NASA erased from history had finally taken its place in humanity's story. Not as a tragedy or a cover-up, but as the beginning of everything. And in the spaces between reality, in dimensions newly accessible to human consciousness, something that had been alone since before time began smiled with a joy that resonated across the cosmos. The cycle was complete, the door was open, the transformation was done, and humanity, curious and brave and endlessly seeking, had found exactly what it had been looking for all along: home.